Moshe Lander is joining us, economics professor at Concordia University. Today we find him in the city of Calgary. What do you make of this massive drop in New York, Moshe? We should point out as well, Toronto was down by 300 points.
Yeah, I think that you hit it right in the lead in there, that this is usually a good predictor that a recession is on its way. The predictor is going to start, say, in the U.S. and drift over into Canada, or are we just going to find our own way into a recession regardless of what goes on in the U.S.?
So what does that mean when we say that, possible recession, the so-called R word? How do you know that we're in a recession?
It's a great thing because you usually know it after it started. So it's not something that we can predict in advance. We can see the warning signs, and this inverted yield curve that you're talking about is usually a good predictor that it's coming. But when it comes or when we're actually inside it, we're not going to be aware of it until kind of the data comes out and confirms what we believe to be that, a recession's coming, or we might already be experiencing it.
I'm going back to my grade 10 economics class here, but I'm curious whether you're surprised that this kind of thing is happening. And by that, I mean, the global economy has been under a lot of pressure in recent years, much of it due to the instability being generated south of the border by a president who is breaking all the rules, a tariff man, and threatening the Chinese. We're in the middle of a trade war here. At what point does it get to be too much? In other words, this is maybe not surprising that we're at this point.
Yeah, I think if you want to talk about what's surprising, it's that it took this long to get to this point. There have been so many lines that Donald Trump has crossed in that tariff war with China. In fact, if you remember yesterday, he said, you know what, I think I'm going to hold off on the next round of tariffs. And the markets actually went up, kind of breathing a sigh of relief. So today, actually, the kind of trigger point was Germany released its economic data and said that they are, in fact, in a recession, that their economy contracted. And that's what sent the markets into a panic, that if there's a chance that the U.S. is going down, if China is already going down, if now Germany is going down, then what's holding up the world economy? And I think that's what's really spooked the markets now, is that it's a flight to safety. And weird as it is, the safest bond market these days is probably the U.S. one. And that's why you're seeing that inverted yield curve.
Yeah, and sort of to add more fuel to the fire, uncertainty, of course, in the United Kingdom, another major economy in the world because of Brexit. Also, the Italian economy not doing well. Now, you mentioned Germany, China, the United States. So it's just kind of one thing after the other, at which point the ball starts to roll and it's too late.
Absolutely. And here in Canada, too, we, of course, in your previous story, we have our own uncertainty. We have a prime minister that's under fire here, and we are 8 weeks out now from an election that is a lot more uncertain than it should be for a first-term prime minister that was elected with such an overwhelming majority. So even here at home, even without the outside stimulus that's coming from the other economies that are suffering, we're suffering here too, with a lot of uncertainty and a lot of provincial fights that are going on with the federal government. That's also adding to a very uncertain business climate here.
No politician currently in office wants to run for re-election in the middle of a recession. That does include primarily, of course, President Donald Trump. The economy has been one of his trump cards, so to speak, thus far. He's putting a lot of pressure on the Federal Reserve as well, pretty unprecedented, sort of bullying that we've seen going on there. What does it mean if we're talking about a recession? What would we see?
You know what? The interesting thing with Donald Trump is that he seems to be a real good politician at diverting where the blame falls. So instead of taking responsibility that it's his tariffs that are instigating a lot of this uncertainty in the global markets, he seems to be very skilled at blaming it on everybody else but him. So I think his base seems to respond to the idea that it's not him. And he seems to be buffering a lot of the economic data better than most would, which is, I guess, in a weird way, credit to him.
In terms of the countries that we were talking about, the Chinese, the Americans, Canada, the European nations, which of them do you think is sort of the best position to withstand this kind of thing?
Gosh, I don't know that any of them really are. Europe is being battered by the China-U.S. trade war and by Brexit. Canada's stuck between major drivers in the U.S., Europe, and China. China maybe could create a stimulus package domestically, and they really don't have to worry too much about their domestic citizens. But they're now being kind of destabilized by what's going on in Hong Kong. So they're probably the best to withstand it, but they're actually suffering as well through their own doing.
Moshe Lander joining us from Calgary to talk a little bit about the markets reacting in a very bad way to a possible recession. The Dow closing down by 800 points, rather. The TSX down by 300 points. Thank you so much for this, Moshe. Good to have you back with us.